Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Charles Sauer was going to be with us at the top of the next hour, but he's here and he's on his way to vacation, Charles. So, hey come on in. Let's have our debate, our conversation, our discussion. We'll see what it turns into right now. And then those of you who have called in or on hold, I'll be picking up your calls in a little bit. We also are going to have Talk Media News a little later on in this half hour. But Charles Sauer is with us, a libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. MarketInstitute.org is the website. And you can tweet him at Market Institute or at Charles Sauer, S-A-U-E-R. And Charles, welcome back, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
It's always nice. I find our conversations interesting, even though it seems always disagree. Someday we should try to figure out something we agree on.
We disagree fairly or in a way that we can understand each other's points.
Yeah, which I think is a good thing. Canada, in response to what happened on this United flight on Sunday, Canada has said that they are going to re-regulate their airlines. We all kind of went through this deregulation thing, the dissolution of the Civil Aeronautics Board in 1978. Also did away with passenger protections. It used to be quite literally against the law for an airline to drag somebody off a plane. And arguably it still is. I mean, there's circumstances under which it can be done. But this clearly was not one of them. I think United broke the law in this case, but that's not the point of this conversation. Yeah. At what point does regulation actually enhance competition? At what point does regulation actually create and enhance the marketplace? And I would argue that in fact deregulation is the cause of this problem. I mean, we're down to what, basically three major airlines in the United States. There's no competition.
The competition is there, and I think something like this makes that competition more vibrant. I would say that the regulation is what hurts the airlines, but an incident like this is horrible. It's bad. It shouldn't happen. It should never happen. And because of that, United has lost what? It was like $1 billion in their.
They're down to about $200 million in valuation. So, but they actually haven't lost anything. It's their stockholders have something that has a little less value, but it'll recover.
It will recover at a slower rate than the other airlines. But it's going to recover
because it's monopolies. I mean, in most of the cities in the United States, if you want to get from point A to point B, whatever they may respectively be, you don't have a lot of choices of airlines, unless you're willing to, take a 17-hour trip, and hop through three cities.
If you have a choice of living in a place where you don't have all of the airlines, you have a choice to move into a city. Maybe you increase your cost of living. Maybe you increased your drive. But if you choose to live out in the country, look, I'm from Kansas. I'm from the places where we didn't have a ton of flights, but we had a Southwest hub. It was great. We could get every place there. People that live further out on the farms in Kansas would drive several hours into the airport. So yes, that does happen. Should we mandate that we build large airports out in the middle of Kansas? So that those people wouldn't have to fly there?
What we used to mandate was that the airlines couldn't become so big that there was no functional competition. I mean, the reality is right now, if Delta raises prices on a particular route that United also flies by $10 at 1 o'clock this afternoon, by 2 o'clock this afternoon, United will have raised it by $10. There may not be explicit collusion, but there's functional collusion. We have a functional monopoly in this country with regard to air travel, and in addition to a whole lot of other things. And that seems like, that is anti-competitive.
Technology has gotten better on pricing. They can compete on a minute-to-minute basis. We have people trading on Wall Street down to microseconds and nanoseconds. So yeah, the fact that they're
but that's not competitive either. People are paying extra to have their computer 3 feet closer to the New York Stock Exchange so that their computer and
competition changes as time moves forward. Competition is going to change. We don't have people competing to light street lamps anymore, right? Those jobs are gone, but we aren't mandating that we have people competing for bidding on lighting street lamps. That doesn't happen. So competition changes. So what we see here is new competition. We see United doing something horrible. They shouldn't. I mean, this guy was dragged out of the plane, dragged forcibly and roughly out of the plane. And people aren't going to fly United as often because of that. They're going to take a financial hit. Their investors are going to take a financial hit. That likely means that people in the future are going to be treated better on United than they would now. That's the way competition in a free market works.
Well, no, that's not how competition works. That's simply how business works, right? You screw your customers. Yeah. You screw your customers in a very public way, and your customers are going to be less loyal to you and less likely to buy or use your product.
And no law is going to change that. A law.
No, I'm not suggesting that a law would. But what I am suggesting, though, is that the practice that United was engaging in should not be allowed. And in fact, 3 years ago, there was an attempt by Congress to regulate this, and United wrote a letter to Congress saying, we will never do this, right? And obviously they were lying because it's in their terms of carriage.
Yep.
So they were in an attempt to avoid regulation, which would have, number one. But number two, you haven't answered my question, which is at what point, how many, if we get down to even, 2 airlines, 1 airline, I mean, how many, at what point do you say consolidation has reached essentially a cancer stage where it's almost impossible to start up an airline
for somebody who supports single payer, it's kind of interesting to say that getting down to less choices is a bad thing. But here's the deal:
this is completely different from single payer.
As the airline industry has gone through different times or different consolidations, we have seen competitors pop up. So Virgin Airlines hasn't been around since the beginning of time. We have a new carrier that is, I think that they have like $25 tickets coming where, you have to pay extra if you bring on bags. You have to pay extra if you want to drink.
Well, United is doing that now.
We have people that are competing. Just to say there's no competition or that it's consolidating is a simplification that doesn't pay attention to what
but at what point, if you've got 3 companies that control 80% of a market, which is basically the case with food, it's basically the case with retail, it's basically the case with airlines, it's basically the case with, pick your industry. Basically, that seems to be acceptable. It used to be that, there had to be at least 20 companies that controlled 80% of the marketplace. Or, where do we set these thresholds in your mind? Or should there be?
You don't set them in my mind. I hope we don't set them in your mind. But I know one of the place that we definitely do not set them is in the government. The government can't move fast enough to define a market. Where we set them is investors. The market sets how many airlines there should be, because if there's, let's say, 1 airline and they start moving up their prices, eventually there's a market down below. And it doesn't matter, just because an airline owns 100% of the market today is definitely not a guarantee that they're going to own anywhere near that tomorrow. We've seen that in industry after industry after industry. Horse and carriage, a horse and buggy go out because of the car. It doesn't matter that if there was 1 horse and buggy company that owned 80% of the market.
But these are not so-called free markets. Just like, you say, oh, Microsoft owns all this market share and Apple owns all this market share. Well, they own that in large part, Microsoft in particular, because of trademark laws and patent and copyright laws. Intellectual property laws, which have been extended wildly. These are government subsidies, essentially. This is corporate welfare that made Bill Gates rich. And the same thing with the airlines. You've got to have a city or a government build an airport, and in order for an airline to function. So there is this relationship with government. Shouldn't there be, since government is us, we the people, we're providing the air traffic control system, we're providing the airports, shouldn't we say, okay, we're paying for all this stuff, you guys have to operate it at least in a way that is consistent with the public good?
Well, the assumption is that the fact that the city owns the airport or the city builds the airport, it's the right thing. If we go to some numbers that I'm more comfortable with or that I've looked at, cities building stadiums is almost always a bad idea and a bad investment. I would assume that it's likely the case with airports as well.
But stadiums are not part of critical infrastructure. The whole point of airports is the same as with roads. It's the commons. It's transportation.
Well, it's commons because you've defined it as the commons.
It's the commons because it's something that, you know, you want everybody to be able to use regardless of station in life.
I would say, well, that's almost frustrating to hear you say that. That this is an aircraft. I might go with you on roads, on highways, and getting around the country. To say that of an airline or an airplane, that starts becoming, you know, where is the limit that we're going to set on what everybody deserves? Do they need to live in a 4,000 square foot house? Is that part of critical infrastructure?
No, you're creating straw men here. You know,
you just said an airport is critical infrastructure, that people get those little bags of peanuts.
No, I'm saying the transportation is critical infrastructure.
I'll go with highways. You know, that's transportation.
Okay, yeah, but you know, a highway is fine if you're trying to get from Pennsylvania to West Virginia, but a highway is not fine if you're trying to get from Pennsylvania to Los Angeles or Alaska, you know, or China or something like that.
Hey, as a Kansan that was on the Oregon Trail, the last stop on the Oregon Trail, you know, people figured out how to get across the country before this if they want to do it. But highways, I'll go with you on. Airlines, we need to let run themselves.
Charles Sauer, Libertarian Economist and President of the Market Institute, marketinstitute.org, and you can tweet him at Charles Sauer. Charles, thank you.
Thank you.
Great having you. We'll be back.